Hi, I'm Matthew Gore from Wellington, New Zealand. Welcome to The Candid Frame.
As a photographer, you likely know that when it comes to travel, it's often a matter of compromise. More often than not, you're traveling with people who aren't photographers. So your desire to get up hours before sunrise or to linger on a street corner for 20 minutes isn't received with much understanding, much less patience. So you squeeze in your photographic moments as you can, because as your travel partner will no doubt tell you, they didn't come all that way just to watch you take pictures. So as much as I've enjoyed traveling with my wife and friends, I've always dreamed of a trip that is not only dedicated to photography, but that I would share with a photographic peer, someone who I wouldn't need to explain myself to or justify myself with. It would be a trip that would allow us to get lost on streets far away from all the tourist traps, led by someone who knew the area so well that there would be no shortage of discoveries and surprises. And while I've yet to have that kind of trip, I know 3 photographers who have. Photographers and friends Sam Abell, Arthur Meyerson, and George Nobechi recently went on a trip through Japan doing exactly what I just described. While George currently lives in Japan, both Arthur and Sam have traveled there to work and teach, but this was the first time that they did it together, not because they were teaching a workshop or working, but because they wanted to spend time together as friends. It appears to have been a magical time, and the 3 of them were kind enough to share some of that with me when we conducted a Skype call during the tail end of their trip. For Sam Abell, the benefits of that trip were quite obvious.
I will say that it's extremely comfortable. There's great comfort level here, that we don't have to apologize for getting up early, staying out late, lingering over a situation, or taking a half day off and just taking a walk. There's been no apologies, no explanation. We've only probably showed each other 2 kinds of pictures. Really a sweet success or something really funny, having to do usually with each other in some absurd situation that one or the other of us caught. And I will say, we talked about this at breakfast this morning, but I am a very dedicated photographer of daily life. So for somebody like me that loves daily life, wherever I am, this trip's been great.
Their travels, some of which was done by train, provided ample opportunities for great photographs, but this trip was more than about picture taking. As Arthur Meyerson aptly describes, it was about moments shared.
I didn't have any photographic expectations for this trip. I never do. I want to go out and I want to be influenced by what's out there. I've always said it might be the light, it might be color, it might be a moment, it might be all 3, but I didn't have any agenda. I just wanted to go. I wanted to be on this trip with these 2 guys. I think the big thing that we had going, and I think in so many words, we got chemistry, and it's worked. That, of course, is a big, big thing in doing a buddy trip or a trip with a friend or friends. Without that, I don't think it would be successful. We could have not made pictures at all, and the 3 of us would have had a good time. We've managed to do that a lot. But the fact that we are doing something we love doing, walking around, seeing, sharing that scene with each other, that's big, that's huge, and that's just something you can't do, all the time. So to be able to have that type of environment, that type of atmosphere, that type of camaraderie, that's what I wanted, that's what we've got, and I think the results will be, again, what we see in the final pictures.
We'll talk to Sam, Arthur, and George about how such a personal journey was unlike anything that they've ever done before, and what experiences they've had together that they would never have had on their own. This is Ibarian X, and welcome back to The Candid Frame. So thanks, guys, for doing this. You guys look like you're having a lot of fun.
We have had a lot of fun. We've hidden the bottles and all the evidence.
Oh, my God. I can only imagine. But let's start off with what brought you guys together and why you decided to do this.
I'll start with the backstory. About 25 years ago, Sam and I, in an evening of libation, dreamed up the idea of a train trip across the country. It could have been Mexico, it could have been India, it could have been a number of places, and it was a dream for a long, long time. And then George Nobechi came into the picture. And I'll let Sam explain how that came about, but this has been the fulfillment of a dream that he and I, and now George, have had and fulfilled, and we're going to talk about it today.
So George and I met in a workshop 4 years ago and struck up a friendship, and a very respectful one. And the basis of it was photography, and his backstory, Japan, his country, and country that Arthur and I respect, admire, and long to be in working. We like it as a place, and we like it as a culture, and we like it as an inspiration for our photography. So I believe I told George about this, and it was a very naturally occurring plan that George has produced and brought forward. Without him, the trip would not have taken place.
And George, for all of you guys have been on the show, so some people may be familiar with each of you, but why don't you kind of catch us up a little bit in terms of what your story is and how you came to collaborate with these two?
So it was 4 years ago this March. In fact, we had the anniversary of that. Sam, Arthur, and I met in Santa Fe. I had signed up for Sam's class at a workshop there, and Arthur was teaching the same week, and the three of us met for the first time then. I had had a whole different career due to family circumstances, death of my father when I was in college, and so I went off to work in the financial industry in Tokyo and New York, but it wasn't for me. I'd always loved photography, but I never considered it as a possible pursuit until I met Sam, and we had a magical week in Santa Fe together. At the end of the workshop, Sam asked me what my plans were. I'd left my home, my career, all my stuff was in storage, so I was kind of wandering. And he said, two things. He said, well, if you're considering photography, I'd like to help encourage that. And two, you should go to Japan, which I was. And I did a Japan by train journey on my own, sort of to rediscover my own roots. And out of the basis of that, I came back to Sam and Arthur and said maybe we could work on, bringing groups of people through expeditions and tours and workshops to Japan. So that's how that conversation began. My first trip was 3 years ago with Arthur in wintertime, and we journeyed together. And since then, we've done a couple of more trips, done 2 trips with Sam. But this was the first time where we, came together, the three of us in Japan, and it was just us, for us, to journey together about friendship and photography.
That's beautiful. That's great. And Sam and Arthur, how did you guys come to know each other, and how long have you known each other?
At least 25 years or more. We met on a rainy evening at J. Mazel's at the bank way back then. At that point, I think we became fast friends, and eventually talked to Reed Callanan at the Santa Fe workshops about teaching the same week, which we've been doing together ever since there, Maine, San Miguel, a few other places. Yeah, the rest has been history.
As you mentioned, George mentioned that you guys respectively have been teaching workshops in Japan. So when you have an opportunity to travel like that, you're still teaching. And so a lot of that time is sort of dedicated to in the service of others. It's quite a different thing to go out for yourself. And you guys usually, oftentimes are doing stuff where you're the photographer, right? But you're doing it because you're working. So now you have the opportunity to do it solely for pleasure, but you're doing it with someone else who's also very accomplished as a photographer. What's that experience like?
It's the best experience, and I want that message to be loudly expressed and clearly expressed to your listeners. I photographed, and Arthur's photographed under every circumstance imaginable, alone, with writers, with producers, art directors, with spouses. The best way to photograph. And by that, I mean the most inspiring and the most energizing way to photograph is what I'm going to call a buddy trip. I've had 2 or 3 of them in my career and life, and the dynamic of being out photographing concurrently, but not simultaneously, is highly energizing. And it's, I believe, on this trip, once again, the proof will be in the photographs. And I think what we're going to see, what we have somewhat slightly seen already, is new photographs done to a high level. So yes, it's been friendship. It's been richly, thanks to George, about Japan, about little seen, little known, little photographed Japan. It's been about trains, which we all three of us love, and the dynamic of Japan, of the rail trip, of our friendship, and of our photographic aspirations. That dynamic is the dynamic of this trip. And as I say, the results will be in the photography, but already we're excited about what we've seen.
How about for you, Arthur?
I absolutely agree. I think a word that came up the other night at dinner that we all, I think, thought matched the trip was generosity. There's a generosity of spirit on this trip that it's been natural. It hasn't been forced. I think the three of us, again, as good, close friends, that's one thing. But in the sharing of our photos, when we go out on a daily basis, we may walk side by side or we may go in three different directions, no plan, just out looking, making the images that we would typically make or not typically make. In my case, first few days, I spent a lot of time watching and observing these two and how they work. Very different than myself. And it's had a bearing, I think, on me on this shoot, on this trip. And I think some of that's rubbed off. On this trip, equipment-wise, I've taken the equivalent of a 24, a 35, and a 50 millimeter lens. That's it. For me, that's substantially less than I would normally take. That already has forced me to see and do things differently. But the encouragement when we get back in the evening and show each other photos and talk, that's wearing beautifully on all three of us. And that goes back to the generosity I was talking about.
George, tell me about the experience. I mean, God, you got these two as bookends, right? You're the luckiest guy in the world as far as I'm concerned right now. But tell me about not just the experience of being with these guys, but when you were thinking about sort of the plan, because you live there. So I would suspect that this exploration that you guys were going to go together was a very personal one as well. So if you could talk about what the experience has been like as a shooter, but also in terms of how you want to share Japan with them.
Very good points, Ibarnex. One, yes, I agree. I'm the luckiest guy in the world. I certainly feel that way. It's been an inspiring, unforgettable couple of weeks for me, for sure. In terms of the personal connection, again, I've always tried to show people in my care or people who are friends who come to visit or to shoot or even, just come to eat the food or whatever, Japan, the very best of Japan that I know. And the things that are usually not on the tourist maps, the guidebooks and things like that, the off the beaten path, the authentic everyday Japan. And so when we talked about this trip, we also wanted to continue that spirit. And it began in the north, in the heartland, where my family's from, of Hokkaido, the northernmost island. And it began in winter. But in terms of planning the way we wanted to go, we wanted to do a north to south where we would experience everything from snow to spring and cherry blossoms as we have done. But to also do it with a combination of the personal from my life, personal from Sam's life and Arthur's life as well in photography in Japan, but to do it in a new way with new destinations woven in between, and always to have the backdrop of it being by train. And what that means, it's, especially a country like Japan, it's the core of how people get around. And being on the trains means that we'll see life happening before us, everyday life, at the stations, in the rail cars, when we get out from the little towns and we'll go out and explore. So we didn't just want to hit the places that had bullet trains and people were flying through, but the little off the beaten path places. In the north, we began in the snow. We went to the town of my grandparents where they lived for half a century, and my grandfather there was a high school teacher. We had a couple of amazing days just sort of exploring and revisiting that, but as photographers working in that place. And then we carried on south into some other areas that I never really had a chance to explore either. And then that brought us down through, a host of other places that were sort of on the radar, places that I wanted to go and explore that I hadn't been to as well. So it was fresh for all three of us, and we could approach things in that way. And finally, we culminate here in Hagi, Sam has a long history with, dating back all the way to 1980 when he was here for the Geographic. But revisiting it now in the springtime, Sam was here in November each time prior that he's been here. And so there's something different for each of us in that. But all the way along, we've chosen, and we can attest to this, but we were alone in most of the places that we went because we were kind of off the main tourist trails.
Yeah, the train cars, the restaurants, it seemed like everywhere we went, we seemed to have places to ourselves, which that actually made it even more special and totally unplanned. Sidebar to that, I think, which is interesting as well, is the subject matter. We're not shooting for festivals or I would say the generic or specific photos that people would normally come and photograph in Japan. In fact, it's been everything but, even though we have been in locations that would certainly qualify for that. It'll be interesting, I think, in the end to see what these photographs all end up being that we select.
Something I brought into the trip was a memory of an influential and moving body of work by Eugene Smith in the 60s on Japanese rail life, you might say. He lived here. He was, I think, the period when he did the well-known Minamata series, but he traveled around Japan by rail, photographed in black and white, and those photographs were published in Popular Photography magazine at the time. I never forgot those photographs. On top of a love for trains, which, as I said, we all have, there was photography and there was Japan, and Smith's work united all those in my memory, and I brought the inspiration of that to this trip.
For me, I think it was Ernst Haas. And I came to Japan, it was my second trip, but a really intense trip in 1984. Ernst was leading a photo tour, about 25 photographers. I was lucky enough, my wife and I, to be along that. And that certainly became my immediate inspiration, not only to be with him, but to be here with him in Japan. That kind of lit my fire, and it's been ever since. And so there have been many, many trips. But the more recent trips that George has produced for Sam and I, and the lucky groups that have gone with us, it's been deeper. We've made a concerted effort each time to do something different, to go to different places, and give people a very different experience.
Traveling by rail is a really sort of interesting manner to sort of get around, because we're so always often in a rush to get from point A to point B, whether it's in a car or it's in a plane. And traveling by rail allows for a lot more sort of pensive time.
Right.
And I wonder how traveling in that way through Japan has sort of shaped how, not only how you see and photograph, but have experienced the country.
To me, it's about pace. As George said, it hasn't all been by bullet train. We took a train called the stove train, which had a stove in the middle of it that they were cooking food on, and a number of trains and regional trains like that. And so the pace has been slow and contemplative. For myself, I think for all three of us, we tried to photograph not only Japan, but the travel experience itself. In other words, I think we could single out a body of work that would just be about train photographs of trains, the interiors, the exteriors, but also photographs of the landscape from the train and passengers and personnel and stations. So, yes, this has been about Japan, but it's also been about travel itself.
On the most efficient transportation system in the world, I think.
The great thing about Japan is that we didn't have any hiccups in terms of our schedule. Whether it was the local or it's the bullet train, everything ran like clockwork. So we essentially, we left a lot of freedom in this trip. We knew where we were going to start in the north and where we were going to finish in the south. But everything in between was sort of, okay, well, we could go to this next town. It looks interesting. And we're planning it the night before. And then we find an inn and it's available and we book that. And then we go get on the train and we go. And it all runs like clockwork. We're there at the time that we want to be there. We had dramatic weather from hail to lightning to snow, blizzards, to spring weather, cherry blossoms. We had it all. When we were, in many ways, we were in the right spot at the right time. So often it was because of hey, let's be on the coast on this train for sunset time. And there we go. We saw one of the most beautiful sunsets, I think, that we can recall. Things like that work in Japan. And all through that is the thread. I've often said about Tokyo as well that the commuter lines, to me, feel like blood vessels. And they're hubs that are like the heart of the city, and they pump, and a train runs through, and then it comes to another place, and pump, and it goes to another. And Japan, I mean, the trains are really the heart of this country, the way people get around, the way they go to visit friends, relatives, etc. And more so than in most other countries, I think when you travel by train here, you see the real Japan.
One thing I think, we haven't talked about this much at all, but I think it's worth referencing, and that is we're paying for this trip ourselves. There isn't a sponsor. There isn't an assignment. None of us really have a destination for these photographs other than, I think all three of us are privately working on books that haven't even been declared. I'm declaring it right now on your program. But Arthur's book is different than mine, and mine is different. George is the most different because this, as you said, is his country and his culture and his history, and Arthur and I have a different history with Japan. And I think all three books are going to be personal, not generic, not coffee table books, but emblems of our love for Japan, which in one way or another, Japan has been a part of my life, even when I'm not here, because of the aesthetic of the culture, because of the people, because of the landscape. I think about Japan more than any other country or culture, and I think about it when I'm not here, and it's influenced my photography. So it refuels what you might call my real life. The rest of my year, the rest of my life to be here fuels who I am spiritually and aesthetically and photographically. And so we're putting our own money and our own time, significant time, into this project. So it isn't perfectly carefree, even though the spirit of it is light and bright and generous, as Arthur said. But we put tangible assets into this trip of time and of money. So if your listeners are inspired by hearing this, my message to them would be, it's worth it.
Yeah. As you likely heard at the top of this episode, I want to hear from you. I want you to introduce yourself at the top of the show. I think it's going to provide a great way for us to get to know each other. And all you have to do is send me a quality recording that says something like this: I'm Robert Parker from Stockton, California, and welcome to The Candid Frame. That's it. Your name, where you're from, and an introduction to the show. Then when you send me that file, just provide me with a link to your website or Instagram feed, and I'll include it in that week's show notes. You could record it in any variety of ways using your computer or your smartphone, but just try to make it as good quality audio as you can. Include about 3 or 4 seconds of unspoken audio before or after you speak to help us to clean up that audio. Use a microphone if you have it, and just find a place to record it and send me the file via info@thecandidframe.com. I look forward to hearing from you. Thanks. You're talking, you've been using the word generosity, which I think is really, really fascinating in terms of a travel trip together, because I think when most people think about traveling with a friend or another photographer, they're always about fixated on the imagery, right? We're going to get some good pictures, but I think that what for me, when I've had the luck to travel with someone that I consider a peer, the photographs are great, but it's the experience of sharing it with someone else that understands it, who I don't have to explain myself to, right, that makes it all the richer. And I think that that's sort of at play here with the three of you. And I really would love each of you to sort of speak on that.
I will say that it's extremely comfortable. There's great comfort level here. that we don't have to apologize for getting up early, staying out late, lingering over a situation, or taking a half day off and just taking a walk. There's been no apologies, no explanation. We've only probably showed each other two kinds of pictures, really a sweet success or something really funny, having to do usually with each other in some absurd situation that one or the other of us caught. And I will say, we talked about this at breakfast this morning, I am a very dedicated photographer of daily life. So for somebody like me that loves daily life, wherever I am, this trip's been great because a lot of people don't like to be photographed in daily life. They wish the camera would go away. But of course, Arthur and George haven't cared. And so they've indulged my documenting of daily life. So that's another document that's going to exist sometime, is that when we put together the pictures of ourselves, they are high-level photographs. So I photograph daily life to be a better photographer. And I photograph daily life because I believe in its worth. But so do George and so do Arthur. That's been a rich experience.
I didn't have any photographic expectations for this trip. I never do. I want to go out and I want to be influenced by what's out there. I've always said it might be the light, it might be color, it might be a moment, it might be all three, but I didn't have any agenda. I just wanted to go. I wanted to be on this trip with these two guys. I think the big thing that we had going, and I think in so many words, we got chemistry, and it's worked. That, of course, is a big, big thing in doing a buddy trip or a trip with a friend or friends. Without that, I don't think it would be successful. We could have not made pictures at all, and the three of us would have had a good time. We've managed to do that a lot. But the fact that we are doing something we love doing, walking around, seeing, sharing that scene with each other, that's big, that's huge, and that's just something you can't do all the time. So to be able to have that type of environment, that type of atmosphere, that type of camaraderie, that's what I wanted, that's what we got, and I think the results will be, again, what we see in the final pictures.
I'll add two aspects to this. One is that I think that when we talk about generosity, one of the things that we can see is that we probably celebrate our our colleagues, our friends' successes more than our own. So when one of us comes and shows the back of the camera and says, "Look what I got," and the two of us, the other two are happier, to see our friend get an amazing photograph than we are when we have something of our own. And so there's that generosity of spirit, that encouragement, which is so great to keep going. And the other thing is that we've been also on the other end, we've been generous to each other about photographic opportunities, like, to each other. George, you should take a look at this, or, come follow me this way. I see something interesting. Can you tell me a little bit about it? And it might have been something that I would have walked by because, I'm from here and all of that. So there's that feedback. But then at the same time, it's, we're pointing out to each other, and we're out there in blizzards, all three of us, for hours, and we're getting cold and wet and all of that. But we're all working. There's nobody. We're focused, we're helping each other, we're pointing out new possibilities and, making different photographs than we would usually make because we're sort of rubbing off on each other in that way.
Yeah.
So it's been inspirational that way as well.
Something that hasn't come up yet, I'll just throw it on, and George and Arthur can talk about it a little bit, but they're using formats and media that are different than, I'm a straight 35 millimeter color DSLR photographer, as I am every other day of the year, but they have different cameras in black and white. You can say what you're doing there.
Well, I am shooting digitally with a couple of Leicas, but I've also decided to do something different, and that was I brought the X-Pan along, that Hasselblad X-Pan, the full camera.
Oh, okay.
I kind of dug out of the closet and thought, this will force me to do something different that I haven't done in a long time, plus the fact that you're shooting film. It's very funny because every time you take a picture, you look on the back, there's nothing to look at. And that itself has been entertaining and funny at the same time. But the point being, I wanted to force myself to try to see and do things differently. And that camera, not only the fact that it's film, is doing that. So I'm excited about that. George, why don't you tell them what you're doing?
Yeah, I'll keep it brief. But in addition to shooting digitally, I'm shooting with a Mamiya 6x7, doing something a little bit different for me as well. Medium format film, slowing down. I've got 10 shots to make with that thing before I need to reload the film, and it's forcing me to be really discretionary about what I choose to shoot with that. And even though I also have a digital camera with me to capture something that I need to quickly, it's making me forcing me to step back a little bit and think about what I really care about, what I want to do, and learning lessons along the way, like leave one shot, at the end of your roll, no matter what, when you're walking back towards the inn for the night, because maybe the most dramatic thing of the day is going to happen right at the end. And if you shot till the end of your roll, you don't have it. Good lessons and things like that in there as well.
Yeah, the film aspect does bring back discipline, which I think is out the window these days with digital. And so, as George just said, it was a couple of times I know he lost a shot because he had the lens cap on. Sorry, George.
Yeah.
I've got several that are going to be goofs too, but it really it does slow you down. It does. There is there's an end to that roll of film, and you've got to be careful and do your best to leave a shot or two there. So that's been interesting. That's been a fun aspect. But yeah, we've certainly covered ourselves digitally as well. So that's probably as much technical as we want to discuss on this.
Yeah. What would you say, each of you, has been a moment that you've experienced there that may or may not be related to a photograph that you may have taken, but can each of you give me a moment that you don't think would have happened had you gone out by yourself and as a result of you guys being together? Something that is special to you.
For me, that happened the first full day. We were in Wakanai, which is the northernmost point of Japan. And we woke up, there was a snowstorm and a very strong piece of architecture that I call the concrete wave. It was a tsunami barrier made very sculptural decades and decades ago. And it's a monumental piece of architecture that looks like a wave. And we went in that direction. The three of us split up. George got up on an elevated area, and after a few minutes, he shouted to me, "Sam, you've got to see this." And I knew that was serious, and I went up, and I saw what he was looking at, and I commenced to photograph it in a way that was different than he was photographing. And then I saw an out-of-bounds area that was precarious to get to, and I said, "George, you've got to help me get on this ledge in this blizzard, and I'm going to crawl on this ledge to this out-of-bounds area, go by the out-of-bounds sign, and make a photograph." So George helped me onto the ledge. I crawled out. He photographed that. It's a very funny but telling photograph.
It's not the only one. There were several. You cross the line, do not take photos, but we got the shot of him crossing the line, getting the photos.
So anyway, what happened was we were all working individually and independently in the same circumstance: blizzard, concrete, massive concrete architectural sculpture. And George shouted to me, "I think you'll like this." And then I reciprocated the favor, and I said, "If you'll help me get out to the ledge and follow me, I think we'll take an even better picture." And I think it's the best picture that I made the entire trip. It was made the first day, and it wouldn't have happened without George getting me up onto the middle level, and then from there, both of us went onto higher, more dangerous, and more illegal.
You'll want to see the behind-the-scenes contact.
Oh, you most definitely. You're going to have to share that with me.
Oh, gosh. I don't know if this is exactly what you're asking, but one thing that has come up, and we've all talked about several times, is color palette. And the color palette that, say, Sam or George has been looking at this past couple of weeks versus mine has been different. I know there were times, not in the beginning, because we dealt with a lot of, we'll say, monochromatic situations, a lot of snow, a lot of, to most people's eyes, black and white. And at some point, maybe a week in, I think I turned to them and said, "I am yearning for some color," and only to remind myself that is color. It's a monochromatic palette, and it's something that, Sam, you in fact have made, I think, the palette for the trip for you has been what you've been looking at. It's been more that way. I myself have found myself looking not so much at bright, vibrant, vulgar color, but color within that monochromatic range and trying to incorporate that. So, yeah, for me, I think color palette's been interesting to think about.
For me, I would say that one of the most difficult things for me as a Japanese photographer living in Japan is just the cultural differences about taking, straight on street photographs, let's say, of depicting people's faces in a scene. And there's a real cultural sort of shyness and disinclination towards being photographed in that manner in certain situations, especially when there's no escaping it, like in a train car. There's nowhere else for the person to turn to. You can make them very uncomfortable by shooting their faces in that situation. It's a little bit different from the U.S. It's just a cultural nuance. I watched Sam work a wonderful scene with a young woman that he, spotted well before we even got on the train. And he followed her to a place and he photographed her. And that might come up later in the conversation. I'll leave that for Sam in terms of the details. But he made a very, very eloquent portrait of her. And to top that off, Sam we discussed the differences about the culture and things like that the prior evening. And Sam took the step of going up to her and introducing himself, showing her the photograph that he made, which was a beautiful, timeless portrait of her, and connecting with her and offering to send her a copy of the picture and all of that, and made it whole, made it really, really special and wonderful. And for me, that was an inspirational moment. It wasn't about a specific photograph, but it was about the process that's undertook to engage with this person. And I learned a very valuable lesson from that, which is, one, the humanity and the importance of, being considerate and human, but getting the shot. Sam got the shot, and he did it because he took it first. He worked first as a photographer and then introduced himself as the wonderful human being that we know him to be, and everybody else who's been around Sam knows him to be. But that order was important. I probably would have been in a situation where I might have asked if it was okay to take her picture first. And then I would have received a very different result because she would have been self-conscious about that whole situation. But knowing that you could still work within a culture and be yourself as a photographer and then be a good human being was a very important lesson for me on this trip.
That's great. Before we wrap up, George, why don't you tell us about your workshops that you've been doing with Sam and Arthur, and what people who may want to join you guys at some point.
Right. So the last few years we've been working together in Japan. What we try and do always is craft bespoke journeys that are very specific to the interests, the way of seeing, and the vision of the photographer who leads the workshop. Arthur and we first did Japan in winter together. That was a season that Arthur hadn't had a chance to explore Japan in before, so we worked that together. And initially we did some traditional locations, but after that, I took Arthur off into the snowy, wilderness of central Japan. Daily life in the farmhouses and all of that kind of thing. With Sam, we both had an inclination towards Matsuo Basho, the Edo period poet, haiku poet, who left his home and journeyed north to write his timeless anthology of haiku poems. Oku no Hosomichi in Japanese, the narrow path to the deep north or the far north. So we used that theme of Basho's journey together as a trip. We then also worked together in bringing Sam back to Hagi for a retrospective exhibition of his work that he shot for the Geographic in 1980, and based an experience around Sam's Hagi, working with local photographers, with the local community, an exhibition, a talk, and all of that. And most recently, just in December, Arthur and I, we did the color of Japan, looking at fall color all around the country and going into these rural locations and all of that together, journeying for 2 weeks. And, we're planning our next journeys together probably a return to Hokkaido and traveling around there together with Sam. And with Arthur, we're going to do an even better version of the winter. It'll have been 4 years, and we're going to come up with a special journey that incorporates some new locations that we've been exploring together. And all along, we have camaraderie, we have sake, we have critiques on the road, and we try to create an authentic experience where we stay in traditional inns like the one that we're in at the moment. That's so wonderful. But so that everybody can live, breathe, eat, and experience Japan, the real Japan.
And real briefly, we're working on doing one in December.
That's right.
Which you might give a couple of details to people.
Right. So that was where I was going to lead into next, which is that we're going to do Tokyo together and some of the areas around Tokyo. But at BioNext, you and I will be working closely together in terms of bringing your style, your sensitivity, your appreciation and awareness of light, color, moment, settings, all of those things together, and your teaching style with showing a different side of Tokyo. Tokyo has so many neighborhoods. There's 23 wards, each of which has a very distinct feel, backdrop, culture to it. And we're going to go not just to photograph all the iconic places that you always see in Tokyo, but really to get out into the suburbs, into the wonderful neighborhoods, and to explore those, to talk about photography, to do critiques together, and explore that wonderful place that is Tokyo. It's almost an entire country unto itself. So, and we've never done a dedicated Tokyo-focused workshop, but I think that what you bring to the table at BioNext is a perfect fit for that city, and we're really excited to be working with you in December on that.
Well, thank you.
I just want to say, before we sign off, I want to make a picture of you. You are in you're in a traditional Japanese inn here, and this.
Oh my God!
When I say that I document daily life, I want you to be a part of our story because you are. And if I could echo what Arthur said about palette, in your new studio and with those clothes on, those glasses, everything in that picture of you has a very refined palette. You are looking great.
Yeah, and you had to catch me on a day I didn't shave. That's just this is definitely a first. Not only gets photographed by Sam Abell, but I get photographed by Sam Abell while I'm on Skype.
Really?
In the meantime, you had a question that you wanted to.
Yeah, my last question, and I'll wait for Sam. He probably knows it, but my last question is I ask each photographer to recommend another photographer for our listeners to discover and explore, and it can be anyone, someone you've long admired or someone you've recently discovered. So who would that one photographer be and why?
Someone I recently discovered, thanks to George, is a photographer, Fukase. What's his?
Masahisa.
Masahisa.
Well, Fukase.
Fukase. There is I think a very recent book, almost an anthology of his work that come out. But a book that I had seen that absolutely turned me on and I acquired recently was a book he did called Ravens, which are, a big, big part of Japanese culture. Anyway, Fukase, Fukase.
I want to give a shout out to the photographer that would most like to be here on this trip, and that is Fred Zafran, a photographer in the Washington, D.C. area who studies Japanese every week with a tutor. He came on one of George's trips, passionately wanted to come on the other and couldn't make it happen, and would dearly love to be on this trip. So for his sincere love of Japan and for his photographs, I want to call out his name, Fred Zafran.
Awesome. And George?
Well, since I'm working with you and I can't say your name and everybody already knows, I will go with Arno Raphael Minkinen. He has really helped me to hone my vision, my own pathway as I go forward. He's a wonderful teacher. He teaches a couple of times a year in different locations around the world. But his photography has a thread to it that is unlike any other. So I'm not going to spoil it by telling people what he does, but he's well worth it.
Okay. Well, thank you guys for including me in this part of your trip. You're going to have to take a couple of shots of sake for me.
That's been done. We'll continue to be done.
But I wish you well on the rest of your trip and safe travels back home.
Can we throw one more thing in?
Yeah, go ahead.
I think we're throwing the same thing in.
Is it a 4-letter word?
No, but we can do that
All
as
right.
well. But young George Nobechi is going to be tying the knot this weekend.
Oh,
We're
Oh, congratulations.
here's to you and now, his lovely woman-to-be, bride-to-be.
Thank you.
We're going to give a shout out to our brother Greg Gorman, too, who's been a real part of this trip. In
Oh,
our
okay.
conversation.
Unbeknownst to him.
Unbeknownst to him. But he did Skype in from Germany. And so,
Oh, did he?
yeah, he did. So you've been with us. Greg's been with us. And now George's bride-to-be also Skyped in. So it's been a modern trip in that respect. Very ancient in ways like this ancient inn, but very modern like today.
Thanks to Sam, Arthur, and George for sharing their time and story with us. You'll find out more about them and their work by visiting our website at thecandidframe.com. And I've also interviewed each of those photographers before, so I'll also include links to their respective episodes in the show notes. And as George mentioned, we are now accepting photographers for our own trip to Tokyo in December. For me, this isn't going to be just a workshop. It's going to be a rich cultural experience that will not just include photography, but a lot of wonderful moments. You can find out more by visiting the website or go to nobechicreative.com/workshops. And in just a few weeks, I will be in Washington, D.C. for Focus on the Story, a photographic conference that focuses on photojournalism, documentary photography, and street photography. I'll be there conducting a workshop, but there are also going to be speakers, photo walks, and a whole lot more. You can find out more and sign up for the workshop by just visiting focusonthestory.org. And remember to check out my YouTube channel, where I discuss different aspects of photography by pulling images from listeners just like you who contribute to the Candid Frame Flickr poll. You can check out the TCF Flickr poll and our YouTube channel by clicking on the link in the show notes and the website. My new book, Making Photographs, Developing a Personal Visual Workflow, is now available. In it, I translate how to see and use light and shadow, line and shape, color, and gesture. It's more than just how to make a good picture, but how you can develop a personal and intimate way of seeing and documenting the world around you. You can order the book today, and when you place your order from the Roque Nook website, use the promo code Pirello40 to receive 40% off the list price. Check it out on the website and the show notes for the link. And if you want to keep up with all things Candid Frame, sign up for our mailing list, and you'll receive 3 free copies of my previously published ebooks. And if you like what you're hearing on the show, please take the time to write a review in the iTunes Store, Spotify, or the Google Play Store, or wherever you find and listen to podcasts. And if you write a review on a blog post or something, let me know and send me a link, because I would really like to thank you on air. You can also support the show by making a monthly contribution through Patreon, or you can make a one-time contribution via PayPal. You'll find the links for both in the show notes and the website. Thanks to James Popp, Frank Field, Naza Kirkendall, Matt Gore, Greg Smith, Tibor Radvani, Jeffrey Nisler, and David Moore for their recent contributions. I can't thank you enough. And if you want to easily access every episode of The Candid Frame, download the Candid Frame app. It's available for both Apple iOS and Android, and it's free. Download it today, and you'll find it where everything else is in the show notes or the website at thecandidframe.com. The Candid Frame's audio engineer is Martin Taylor, who you can find at theothermartintaylor.com. The show's senior producer is Cynthia Parker, and our music is from Kevin MacLeod, whose royalty-free music can be found at incompetech.com. And you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at simply @IbarianX. And this is IbarianX, and this is The Candid Frame.